The Fog of War. I had a different episode planned. It was controversial. It had names, it had clips, it had claims. It had the kind of subject that probably would have gotten attention fast, maybe a lot of attention. The kind of story people see online and immediately start sharing before they even finish reading it. The kind of story that makes people pick a side before they know what the hell happened. And I stopped. Not because I am scared to talk about difficult things. Not because I suddenly decided controversy is bad. Controversy is not bad. Sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes somebody needs to ask the question nobody else wants to ask. Sometimes the story is real. Sometimes the problem is real. Sometimes the people involved need to answer for what happened. But being first is not the same as being right. And having a clip is not the same as having the full story. Having a headline is not the same as having context. Having a lot of people screaming about something is not the same as knowing what actually happened. That is the fog of war. And that is what this episode is about. Because every day we wake up inside an information war. Not always a literal war. Not always tanks, missiles, uniforms, and maps. Sometimes it is headlines. Sometimes it is viral clips. Sometimes it is a tweet. Sometimes it is a 15-second video with a dramatic caption. Sometimes it is a politician. Sometimes it is a talking head. Sometimes it is an influencer who figured out that outrage pays better than honesty. And sometimes it is a story that is almost true, which can be more dangerous than a story that is completely false. Because the best misinformation does not always invent everything. Sometimes it takes one real piece of information, removes the context, adds a little rage, adds a little fear, points everybody at an enemy, and lets the algorithm do the rest. That is the battlefield now. Your attention is a battlefield. Your anger is a resource. Your trust is being competed for. And every platform, every news outlet, every political group, every influencer, every brand, and every person trying to get your attention knows one thing. Anger moves. Fear moves. Outrage moves. A calm correction posted 2 days later? That usually does not move nearly as fast. So I had a choice. I could have made the episode. I could have said the names. I could have played the clips. I could have added my opinion. I could have hit publish. And maybe it would have done numbers. Maybe people would have loved it. Maybe people would have hated it. Maybe it would have gotten shared around because everybody is already ready to be angry. But I could not verify enough of it. And that matters. Because this show is not supposed to be another outrage machine. I am not here to farm your anger. I am not here to throw a grenade into a comment section and walk away. I am here to talk about systems, incentives, strategy, the map, the game underneath the game. And sometimes the strongest move is not charging into the fog. Sometimes the strongest move is stopping and asking, what do we actually know? What are we assuming? Who benefits if I believe this immediately? What information is missing? What happens if I am wrong? Welcome to the Max Delta Hour. I'm Max Delta, and this is episode 4, The Fog of War. How to think when everyone wants you angry. Rage is a business model. So here is the ugly part. A lot of the internet is not designed to make you informed. It is designed to make you react. Because reaction is measurable. Reaction becomes clicks. Clicks become watch time. Watch time becomes ad money. Ad money becomes influence. Influence becomes power. And outrage is one of the fastest fuels in the entire machine. So think about what spreads. A calm headline that says, there may be more context here, does not move like, look what they did. A careful person saying, we should wait for the facts, does not move like, this is treason. A 10-minute explanation with sources does not move like a 12-second clip with dramatic music and a caption telling you exactly who to hate. That is not an accident. That is product design. The platforms learned what keeps people watching: conflict, fear, humiliation, scandal. Us versus them. And outrage has a special advantage. It makes people feel smart before they have done any work. You see a clip, you feel the hit, you recognize the villain, you choose the team, you hit share. For a second, it feels like action. But most of the time, it is just somebody else using your nervous system to move their content. So that does not mean the problem is never real. Sometimes the clip really is bad. Sometimes the person really did say the thing. Sometimes the institution really is corrupt. Sometimes the story deserves anger. But anger is not proof. Anger is a signal. It tells you something might deserve attention. It does not tell you that you have the complete map. And that difference matters. Because the machine does not need you to be right. It needs you to keep moving, keep scrolling, keep arguing, keep watching the next response video, keep clicking the next post, keep feeding it attention. Rage has become a business model because it is cheap to produce and expensive to resist. It takes almost no effort to post a provocative headline. It takes no effort to cut out the 5 seconds that look the worst. It takes no effort to throw a label on somebody: traitor, fascist, communist, racist, groomer, bootlicker. Whatever word will make the other side stop thinking and start swinging. But it takes time to verify. It takes patience to read. It takes humility to say, I might be missing something. It takes discipline to wait. And the algorithm does not reward waiting nearly as much as it rewards immediate certainty. That is why the fog is so thick. Everybody is firing. Everybody is reacting. Everybody is trying to be first. And nobody wants to be the person who says, hold on, what do we actually know? Because that person is less exciting. They get called weak. They get called fake neutral. They get accused of defending the other side. But there is a difference between being neutral and being disciplined. Discipline is not weakness. It is how you keep somebody else from aiming your weapon. So when a story hits your feed and your blood pressure spikes, do not pretend the emotion is useless. Notice it. Use it as a warning light. But do not hand the keys to it. Ask who posted it. Ask what is missing. Ask whether the clip starts in the middle. Ask whether there is a longer version. Ask what people who disagree are saying. Ask who gets paid, elected, followed, or empowered if this catches fire. Because the internet is full of people selling matches in a dry forest, and they need you angry enough to strike one. Rage is a business model. Your attention is the inventory. And if you do not learn how the machine works, it will keep turning your emotions into somebody else's profit. The first casualty is context. The first casualty in the information war is context. Not truth. Context. Because truth can survive a lot. A real quote can be true. A real video can be true. A real statistic can be true. A real event can be true, and still be used to tell you a lie. That is what makes this so dangerous. The clip does not have to be fake. It just has to be incomplete. Take a sentence out of a 10-minute conversation. Take a reaction out of a 30-minute video. Take a statistic without the time frame. Take a headline without the original report. Take a photograph without knowing when or where it was taken. Take a political quote without the question that came before it. Now you have something that looks like evidence, and maybe it is evidence, but evidence of what? That is the question. Because context tells you what happened before, what happened after, who was involved, what was edited out, what the actual stakes were, what the speaker meant, what the number measures, what the image does not show. Without context, people do not see the map. They see one flashing red dot and somebody screaming that the whole world is on fire. And I get why it works. Nobody has time. Everybody is overloaded. People are working. People are raising kids. People are dealing with bills, health, stress, family, work, and 100 other things. You see a clip while you are standing in line at a store or sitting on the couch after a long day. You do not have 2 hours to investigate it. You have 15 seconds. So the caption does the thinking for you. The comments tell you what to feel. The headline tells you who the villain is. And before you know it, you are emotionally invested in a story you have barely examined. That is not because you are stupid. That is because the system is built around speed. But speed has a cost. In a real war, bad intelligence can get people hurt. A wrong map can send a unit into the wrong place. A false report can trigger a bad decision. A commander who thinks he knows more than he does can turn uncertainty into disaster. The information war works the same way. You see one thing, you assume 5 more things. Then you build a whole emotional reaction on top of those assumptions. And by the time more information comes out, you have already picked your side. You have already posted. You have already argued. You have already decided who deserves your anger. Now, changing your mind feels like losing. That is the trap. A lot of people would rather defend a bad take than admit they got caught with incomplete information. Not because they are evil, because being wrong online feels public now. It feels embarrassing. It feels like surrendering to the other team. But changing your mind when the facts change is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is a sign that your brain still works. You are allowed to say, I saw the first clip. I reacted too fast. I did not have the whole story. That is not cowardice. That is discipline. And discipline matters more now than ever, because AI can create images. AI can create voices. AI can create polished-looking video. It can make fake things feel real fast. But even without AI, people have always been able to manipulate context. You do not need a deepfake when a misleading caption will do. You do not need to invent a quote when you can cut it in half. You do not need to lie completely when you can let everybody else make the wrong assumption. That is the old game. The tools are getting better. The tactic is not new. So before you share the thing that made you furious, pause. Find the longer clip. Find the original source. Find the date. Find the full quote. Read past the headline. Look for what does not fit the story you were handed. Because sometimes the missing piece changes everything. And sometimes it does not. Sometimes the story is exactly as bad as it first looked. But you should know that because you checked, not because somebody gave you a caption and a target. The first casualty in the information war is context. Do not let your brain become the second. Being first is not being right. There is a sickness in the way we talk now. Everybody wants to be first. First to break the story. First to post the clip. First to call the villain. First to pick the side. First to say, I knew it. And because the internet rewards speed, people start treating speed like credibility. But it is not. Being first is not being right. In fact, being first usually means you are working with the least information anyone is ever going to have about that situation. That should be obvious. The first version of a breaking story is almost always incomplete. People are confused, details are missing, witnesses disagree. The full video is not out. The documents are not out. The official statement is not out. The follow-up reporting is not out. But the takes are already out. The memes are already out. The outrage is already out. The teams are already formed. And once the teams form, truth has to fight uphill. Because now it is no longer just about what happened. It is about identity. People have already decided, this proves my side was right. This proves your side is evil. This confirms what I always believed. And now, if the facts get more complicated, people do not want to hear it. Complication feels like betrayal. Context feels like weakness. A correction feels like giving the enemy a win. That is how the fog gets weaponized. Not because nobody can find the truth, but because people become emotionally invested before the truth arrives. Think about how many times you have seen it. A video goes viral. Everyone is furious. 1,000 reaction videos appear. The story gets repeated so many times that it feels proven just because it is everywhere. Then a day later, more footage comes out, or a witness explains something, or the date is wrong, or the clip was edited, or the claim was exaggerated, or the whole thing turns out to be different than the original post said. And what happens? Almost nothing. The correction gets a fraction of the reach. The original rage has already done its job. The damage is already out there. The narrative already moved. That is why I stopped on the episode I almost made, because I could feel the temptation. I could feel the easy version. Say the thing, use the clip, make the title hit hard, let people be mad, let the comments explode. And maybe it would have worked. Maybe it would have done numbers. But what happens if I am wrong? What happens if I miss context? What happens if I send people after a story that is not fully verified? Then I am not doing commentary. I am doing the same thing I am criticizing. I am using the fog. And I do not want this show to become that. I want the Max Delta Hour to have opinions, strong ones. I want it to be honest. I want it to be raw. I want it to say things that might make people uncomfortable. But I also want it to have standards. Because standards are what separate a real signal from random noise. Anybody can be loud. Anybody can be angry. Anybody can make a thumbnail with somebody's face, a red arrow, and the word exposed. That does not make them smart. That does not make them right. That does not make them useful. Sometimes the strongest move is to wait. Not forever, not because you are afraid, but long enough to ask better questions. Long enough to see whether the story holds up. Long enough to separate what you know from what you assume. Long enough to admit the map is still loading. That is not cowardice. That is reconnaissance. And reconnaissance is not glamorous. Nobody claps for the guy who says, "We need more intel." But that guy is often the one keeping everyone else from charging into an ambush. So remember this when the next big story hits. The first person to tell you what happened might be right. They might also be guessing. The loudest person might be informed. They might also be monetizing your reaction. The cleanest story might be true. It might also be missing the one detail that changes everything. Do not confuse urgency with accuracy. Do not confuse confidence with knowledge. And do not confuse being first with being right. Because in the fog of war, the person who waits for better intel is not falling behind. They are trying not to walk everybody into a minefield. Read the map before you move. So, what do you actually do? Because be careful online is not enough. Everybody knows they should probably be careful. Then a story hits their feed. The caption is insane. The clip looks bad. The comments are on fire. And suddenly, careful goes right out the window. So you need a system. A quick one. Not a college course. Not some fake detective routine where you spend 6 hours analyzing every post. Just a few questions that help clear the fog before you move. Question 1. What do I actually know? Not what do I feel, not what does the caption say, not what are people in the comments assuming. What do I know? Maybe you know a video exists. Maybe you know somebody said something. Maybe you know an event happened. That is it. Everything else might still be an assumption. And separating facts from assumptions is one of the most valuable skills you can build right now. Because the internet is built to blend them together. A fact gets posted. An assumption gets added. A motive gets invented. A villain gets chosen. A narrative gets built. Then everybody talks about the narrative like it was the fact. Slow it down. What do we actually know? Question 2. What is missing? Does the clip start in the middle? Does it end before the response? Is there a longer version? Who recorded it? When was it recorded? Where was it recorded? What happened before this? What happened after this? What question was asked before that answer? What part of the story would make this look different? You do not have to assume the missing context makes somebody innocent. You just have to admit that missing context exists. That is a huge difference. Question 3. Who benefits if I believe this immediately? This question is not about becoming paranoid. Not every story is some giant conspiracy, but incentives matter. They always matter. Does a political group benefit? Does a media outlet benefit? Does an influencer benefit? Does somebody get followers, donations, votes, clicks, sales, or attention if this story catches fire? Because when you understand the incentive, you understand why the story may be framed a certain way. You do not have to dismiss the story. Just understand that nobody is posting into the void for no reason. Somebody wants something. Question 4. What would change my mind? This is where people get stuck. They see something that confirms what they already believe, and suddenly no evidence on earth could move them. That is not conviction. That is team loyalty. Real conviction can survive questions. Real conviction can survive evidence. Real conviction says, here is what I believe. Here is why I believe it. And here is what I would need to see to change my mind. That is strength, because it means you are trying to understand the map, not just defend your spawn point. And question 5. What happens if I am wrong? This one matters, because sharing something false is not always harmless. A bad claim can damage someone's reputation. It can send people after the wrong target. It can make real problems harder to talk about later. It can make your own audience trust you less. And it can turn you into another person spreading smoke because smoke gets attention. You do not need to be perfect. Nobody is. But you should care enough to ask what the cost is if you are wrong. That is the framework. What do I know? What is missing? Who benefits? What would change my mind? What happens if I am wrong? 5 questions. That is it. You do not have to become a journalist. You do not have to become a lawyer. You do not have to become some internet detective with red string on the wall. You just have to stop letting every emotional headline pull the trigger for you. Because in the fog of war, the first job is not to win the argument. The first job is to avoid shooting your own people. And if you can learn to read the map before you move, you are already playing smarter than most of the internet. When teams replace thinking. One of the biggest problems in the fog of war is that people stop looking for the truth and start looking for a win. Not a real win, a team win, a political win, a cultural win, a my side was right again win. And once that happens, facts become secondary, because now the story is not about what happened, it is about whether the story helps your team or hurts your team. You see it everywhere. A story breaks. If it makes the other side look bad, people share it instantly. No hesitation, no questions, no context, no patience. But if the same kind of story makes their own side look bad, suddenly everybody becomes a legal scholar. Now they need every document, every angle, every witness, every possible explanation. Now context matters. Now due process matters. Now we need to wait. And look, sometimes waiting is exactly the right move, but it should be the right move when it is your side too. That is the test. Can you apply the same standard to people you agree with that you apply to people you do not? Because that is where real thinking starts. Team loyalty is powerful because it feels safe. You know who the good guys are. You know who the bad guys are. You know what you are supposed to say. You know which headlines to trust. You know which people to mock. You know which facts matter and which ones are propaganda. It is comfortable. It saves time. You do not have to think through every issue from scratch. The team already did it for you. But comfort is not the same as truth. And a team can be wrong. Your side can be wrong. My side can be wrong. Everybody is capable of taking one real fact, adding 10 assumptions, and building a story that feels amazing because it confirms what they already wanted to believe. That is why the most dangerous phrase online might be, "Of course they did." Because "of course they did" means the investigation is over before it started. It means the conclusion came first. The evidence just showed up later to decorate it. And once you decide the answer before you examine the question, you are not analyzing anything. You are role-playing certainty. This does not mean you cannot have beliefs. It does not mean you have to sit in the middle of every issue and act like all sides are equally right. That is fake too. You can have strong opinions. You can support a candidate. You can believe an institution is corrupt. You can think a policy is destructive. You can think someone is lying. But your beliefs should make you more careful, not less. Because the more you care about an issue, the easier it is for somebody to manipulate you through it. The more emotional the topic is, the more discipline you need. Think about it like a battlefield. If the enemy knows exactly where you are going to charge, they do not have to beat you in a fair fight. They just need to put something in front of you that makes you run without thinking. A flag, an insult, a rumor, a clip, a headline, a target. And if they know you will react every time, They can steer you. That is what the attention war is doing. It is testing your reactions. It is learning what makes you angry. It is learning what makes you share. It is learning what makes you stop thinking. Do not become that easy to control. Do not let every headline turn you into somebody else's infantry. You are allowed to support a side. You are allowed to care deeply. You are allowed to fight for what you believe. But read the map first. Check your intel. Ask whether you are defending a principle or just defending a jersey. Because when teams replace thinking, everybody loses. The truth loses. The conversation loses. And the people making money from the conflict win. The fog of war gets thicker every time we stop asking what happened and start asking who gets embarrassed. Do not fall for it. You are not here to win every argument. You are here to understand the battlefield. AI and the new fog. Now we have to talk about AI, because the fog of war is getting thicker. Not someday, now. And I am not saying that because I think AI is evil. I use AI. I build with AI. I think it is one of the most powerful tools regular people have ever been given. It can help you write. It can help you learn. It can help you build websites. It can help you organize ideas. It can help small creators and small businesses do things that used to require an entire team. That is real. That matters. But every powerful tool has a shadow. And the shadow of AI is that the old question, did this really happen, is about to become a lot harder to answer. A picture used to feel like proof. A video used to feel like proof. A voice recording used to feel like proof. Now, not automatically. Now you have to ask, where did this come from? Who posted it first? Is there an original source? Is there corroboration? Is the timing real? Does the audio match the video? Does the person actually say that? Is this a real clip, an altered clip, a synthetic clip, or a real clip wrapped in a fake story? That sounds exhausting. And honestly, sometimes it is. But that is the new environment. The old internet trained us to react to visuals. See it, believe it, share it. The new internet is going to punish that instinct. And here's the wild part. AI does not even need to make something completely fake to cause damage. Sometimes all it has to do is make something plausible. Something that looks close enough, sounds close enough, feels close enough. Something that confirms what people already believe about a politician, a celebrity, a company, a group, a war, a protest, a scandal, whatever. Then the machine takes over. One account posts it. A few people share it. Someone reacts to it. Someone makes a response video. Someone else posts it with a more dramatic caption. And by the time anyone asks whether it was real, the emotional damage is already done. The story already traveled. The target has already been chosen. The team has already formed. That is why AI is not just a technology story. It is an information story. It is a trust story. It is a culture story. It is a political story. It is a business story. Because trust is becoming more valuable. If everything can be copied, generated, remixed, edited, or faked, then people are going to start looking harder for signals that something is real. A real source, a real person, a real archive, a real reputation, a real community, a real track record. That is why building your base matters. That is why having a name you stand behind matters. That is why being careful with your credibility matters. In a world full of synthetic noise, trust becomes armor. And do not get me wrong. You do not need to become paranoid about every image you see. You do not need to assume every video is fake. That is another trap. The goal is not to become so suspicious that you believe nothing. The goal is to become disciplined enough that you do not believe everything instantly. There is a difference. You do not need perfect certainty. You need better habits. Pause, check, compare. Look for the source. See who else has confirmed it. Ask whether the story is designed to inform you or trigger you. Because the more perfectly a piece of content seems designed to make you furious, terrified, or euphoric, the more you should probably slow down. AI is going to give people incredible tools. It is also going to give liars incredible tools. That is just reality. So your job is not to fear the tool. Your job is to level up your judgment. Learn what the new battlefield looks like. Learn how easily things can be manipulated. Learn the difference between evidence and theater. Learn to pause when everyone else is charging. Because the next phase of the fog of war is not going to be louder. It is going to be more believable. And if you want to stay sharp in that world, you need more than opinions. You need discernment. Skepticism is not cynicism. Now, there is another trap. You start learning about bad incentives. You start seeing edited clips. You start seeing fake headlines. You start seeing AI-generated garbage. You start seeing how easily people can manipulate a story. And eventually, you can become cynical about everything. You start saying, nothing is real. Everybody is lying. Every institution is corrupt. Every video is fake. Every source has an agenda. Nobody can be trusted. And look, I understand where that comes from. But that is not wisdom either. That is just another kind of fog. Skepticism is healthy. Cynicism is lazy. Skepticism says, show me. Help me understand. What is the source? What is missing? What would prove this? Cynicism says, it is all fake anyway. Why bother? And that is dangerous because once you decide nothing is trustworthy, you become easy to manipulate in a different way. Now anybody can tell you the truth is impossible to know. Anybody can dismiss evidence by saying it is all propaganda. Anybody can hide behind confusion. Anybody can avoid accountability because you are too exhausted to believe anything. That is not freedom. That is surrender. The goal is not to believe nothing. The goal is to become harder to fool. There is a difference. You can recognize that institutions have flaws without believing every institution is evil. You can recognize that media has incentives without assuming every reporter is lying. You can recognize that politicians spin things without assuming every event is staged. You can recognize that AI can fake things without assuming every image is fake. You can recognize that people have agendas without pretending facts do not exist. That is the balance. It is harder than picking a team. It is harder than trusting every headline. It is harder than calling everything a conspiracy. But it is real thinking. Because real life is complicated. Sometimes the official story is incomplete. Sometimes the viral story is misleading. Sometimes the first report is wrong. Sometimes the correction is wrong too. Sometimes the person you dislike is telling the truth. Sometimes the person you agree with is full of shit. Sometimes a bad institution does something right. Sometimes a good person makes a bad decision. Sometimes the facts do not give you the clean ending you wanted. That is life. That is the map. And if you need every story to have heroes, villains, and a perfect explanation by lunchtime, you are going to get manipulated constantly. This is why patience matters. Patience is not passive. Patience is not weakness. Patience is a weapon. It gives the truth time to breathe. It gives evidence time to appear. It gives you time to separate the signal from the noise. It keeps you from becoming another person yelling with absolute certainty about something you only learned about 20 minutes ago. And honestly, that is rare now. The internet rewards instant confidence. It rewards the person who says, I know exactly what happened, even when they clearly do not. But confidence is cheap. Anybody can speak loudly. Anybody can look certain. Anybody can make a video with dramatic music and a face that says, you need to hear this. The harder thing is saying, I have a strong opinion, but I am still checking the map. That is not weakness. That is control. And control matters because the fog of war is designed to take it from you. It wants your emotions first, your attention second, your loyalty third, your judgment last. Do not give it all away. Keep some of yourself. Keep the ability to pause. Keep the ability to change your mind. Keep the ability to say, I do not know yet. That sentence might be one of the most powerful things you can say right now. I do not know yet. Not because you are ignorant, because you are refusing to pretend certainty before the evidence arrives. So do not become gullible, but do not become hopeless either. Do not trust everything, but do not trust nothing. Read the map. Check the intel, watch the incentives, look for evidence, stay open to correction. And remember, the goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to see clearly enough to avoid walking into the ambush. Your voice is a weapon. Here is where this gets personal. Because it is easy to talk about misinformation like it is somebody else's problem. The media does it. Politicians do it. Influencers do it. Big accounts do it. Platforms do it. And yeah, they do. But every person with a post button has some responsibility too. Every share is a signal. Every comment adds energy. Every clip can move people. Every accusation can spread. Every confident statement can become somebody else's evidence 5 minutes later. That is the part people forget. You do not need 1 million followers to cause damage. You just need to be wrong in the right room. A story moves through people. One person posts it. Another person adds a caption. Someone else says, "This is insane if true." Then somebody removes the "if true." Then somebody turns it into a video. Then somebody reacts to the video. Then suddenly 1,000 people are talking about something that started as one unverified claim. Nobody feels responsible because everybody only touched it for a second. But that is how the fire spreads. Everybody carries one spark. That is why I pulled back from the episode I almost made. I had enough to be interested. I had enough to be suspicious. I had enough to think there might be a real story there. But I did not have enough to stand in front of people and say, "This is what happened. This is who is responsible. This is what you should believe." And I'm not going to pretend that decision was easy. Because part of me wanted to make it. Part of me wanted the big moment. The episode that gets people talking. The one with the names, the clips, the bold title, the comments going crazy. But another part of me asked a better question. What happens if I am wrong? Not slightly wrong, actually wrong. What happens if the context changes the whole story? What happens if I send people toward a person or a claim that does not deserve it? What happens if I build attention by borrowing certainty I do not actually have? That is not a win. That is not journalism. That is not commentary. That is just using the fog. And I do not want this show to become that. The Max Delta Hour can be opinionated, it can be raw, it can be political, it can be funny, it can be uncomfortable, it can call out bad ideas, bad systems, bad incentives, and bad strategy. But it should not become careless. Because credibility is not built by never being wrong. Nobody can do that. Credibility is built by caring when you might be wrong, by correcting yourself, by saying what you know, by saying what you do not know, by refusing to turn every rumor into content just because the algorithm might reward it. That is harder than it sounds, because certainty feels good. Certainty gets applause. Certainty makes people feel like they are on the right side of something. But certainty without evidence is just confidence wearing armor it did not earn. And that is dangerous, especially now, especially when people are exhausted, especially when everyone is angry, especially when a headline can put a target on somebody before the facts even show up. Your voice is a weapon. Not always a weapon against someone. Sometimes it is a weapon against confusion. Sometimes it is a weapon against manipulation. Sometimes it is a weapon against bad ideas. Sometimes it is a weapon against the pressure to react before you think. But any weapon needs discipline. You do not point it everywhere. You do not fire because somebody else is yelling. You do not pull the trigger because the crowd wants a show. You identify the target. You check the intel. You understand the consequences. Then you decide whether the shot is worth taking. That is what I want this show to be. Not a safe space for lazy thinking. Not an outrage factory. A place to read the map. A place to understand the incentives. A place to slow the fog down long enough to see what is actually in front of us. Because in the information war, your voice matters. Use it like it does. The cost of being wrong. Let's talk about the cost of being wrong. Because people act like an incorrect post is no big deal. Delete it. Move on. Everybody gets things wrong sometimes. And that is true. Nobody is perfect. Nobody has perfect information. Nobody is going to call every story exactly right. But there is a difference between making an honest mistake and being reckless because recklessness gets attention. The cost of being wrong is not always obvious at first. Sometimes it is a reputation. Sometimes it is a friendship. Sometimes it is a business. Sometimes it is a person getting dragged by thousands of strangers who only saw one clip and one caption. Sometimes it is a real issue becoming harder to talk about later because people burned all their credibility on a bad version of the story. And sometimes the cost is smaller. Sometimes it is just that people stop trusting you. They hear you make a big claim. They watch you speak with total certainty. Then the story changes, and instead of correcting it, you disappear. Or you move the goalposts, or you pretend you never said it. People notice that. Maybe not right away, but they notice. Trust is slow to build, fast to spend, and hard to get back. That applies to creators. It applies to journalists. It applies to politicians. It applies to businesses. It applies to regular people posting on Facebook at 2 a.m. Every time you share something, you are making a small bet with your credibility. You are saying, I think this is worth putting my name next to. I think this is true enough to pass along. I think this deserves somebody else's attention. That is not nothing. And here is the thing. You do not have to become afraid to speak. That is not the lesson. The lesson is not, never have an opinion, never post anything controversial, never call out a problem, never take a position. That would be useless. The lesson is, know the difference between a fact, a suspicion, an interpretation, and a rumor. Say which one you are dealing with. That alone would improve most conversations online. A fact is something you can support. A suspicion is something that makes you want more answers. An interpretation is what you think the facts might mean. A rumor is something you heard but cannot verify. Those are not the same thing. But online, people blend them together constantly. A rumor becomes a suspicion. A suspicion becomes an accusation. An accusation becomes a fact because enough people repeated it. Then anyone who asks for proof gets treated like they are defending the accused. That is how people get trapped. And that is why wording matters. Instead of saying, this is exactly what happened, you can say, this is what is being claimed. I want to see more evidence. Instead of saying, this proves they are corrupt, you can say, if this is accurate, it raises serious questions. Instead of saying, everybody knows, you can say, here is what I have seen so far. That does not make you weak. It makes you precise. And precision is a form of strength. Because the goal is not to sound the most certain. The goal is to be useful. The goal is to help people see more clearly. The goal is to keep the truth from getting buried under the noise. And sometimes that means saying, I do not know yet. I need more context. I was wrong about that part. The facts changed. That is not a loss. That is how you keep your weapon clean. The fog of war punishes careless people. Maybe not immediately. Maybe they get views. Maybe they get clicks. Maybe they get applause from their side. But eventually, people learn who is careful and who is just loud. They learn who corrects the record. They learn who waits for proof. They learn who is willing to say the hard thing when it is true, and who is willing to say anything when it performs. That difference becomes your reputation. So protect it. Not by being silent, by being disciplined, because your credibility is part of your base. And every time you speak, you are either reinforcing it or putting a hole in the wall. The discipline to wait. One of the hardest things to do right now is wait. Not forever, not hide, not avoid every difficult topic. Just wait long enough for the fog to clear. Because the internet makes waiting feel like losing. If you do not react immediately, somebody else will. If you do not post first, the conversation moves on. If you do not choose a side fast enough, people start assuming you are weak, scared, compromised, or secretly on the other team. That pressure is real, but pressure does not mean you have to move. In gaming, especially in a bad situation, the worst thing you can do is panic push. You lose sight of the map. You lose track of your resources. You stop communicating. You run toward the first enemy you see, and suddenly you are dead, your team is split, and the entire fight turns into chaos. The smarter move is sometimes to hold, reload, check angles, get intel. Wait for your people. Make sure you know what is actually in front of you. That is not cowardice, that is discipline. The same thing applies to information. You see a story, you feel the emotional hit, you want to react. Maybe you want to defend somebody, maybe you want to attack somebody, maybe you want to say, I knew it. But before you hit post, ask yourself, am I responding to the truth or am I responding to the adrenaline? Because those are not the same thing. Adrenaline makes everything feel urgent. Truth is not always urgent. Sometimes truth needs time. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. Sometimes it gets uglier. Sometimes it gets more complicated. Sometimes it proves the first story was right. Sometimes it proves the first story was nonsense. But if you are willing to wait, you give yourself a chance to see it. And waiting does not mean doing nothing. Waiting can be active. You can look for the original source. You can watch the full clip. You can read beyond the headline. You can compare coverage. You can ask someone who knows more than you do. You can save the post and come back later. You can say, I am watching this. I have questions. I want more information before I make a call. That is not weak language. That is honest language. And honest language is becoming rare. People confuse certainty with strength. But certainty is cheap when you do not have to prove it. Anybody can look at a partial clip and act like they solved the case. Anybody can make a dramatic video and speak in absolutes. Anybody can call themselves a truth teller while refusing to acknowledge what they do not know. The harder thing is having enough confidence to admit uncertainty. To say, this looks bad, but I need the full picture. That is a person who is in control of themselves. And self-control is power. There is another benefit to waiting. It protects you from becoming addicted to the moment. A lot of people are not even chasing truth anymore. They are chasing the feeling of being involved. They want to be part of the first wave, part of the outrage, part of the trending topic, part of the pile-on. They do not want to miss the moment. But moments pass. The internet moves on. The story gets replaced by another story. The same people who were screaming yesterday are screaming about something new today. And meanwhile, your name is still attached to whatever you posted. Your credibility stays behind after the trend leaves. That is why discipline matters. Not because it makes you boring, because it makes you harder to use, harder to manipulate, harder to bait, harder to turn into somebody else's weapon. The fog of war is full of people shouting, move now, pick now, share now, attack now. But the person who can pause, breathe, and check the map has an advantage. They are not behind. They are gathering intel. So the next time you feel that pressure to react instantly, remember this. You do not owe the algorithm your first thought. You do not owe the crowd your immediate anger. You do not owe every viral clip a verdict. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is wait. Let the dust settle. Let more information arrive. Then decide whether the fight is real. Because in the fog of war, patience is not passive. Patience is reconnaissance. Information is not intelligence. Here is another problem with the modern world. We have more information than any generation in history, and somehow a lot of people feel less clear than ever. That is because information is not intelligence. Seeing more posts does not mean you understand more. Watching 10 reaction videos does not mean you have better intel. Reading 100 comments does not mean you know what happened. Sometimes it just means you absorbed 100 versions of somebody else's emotion. Information is raw material. Intelligence is what you do with it. Information is the clip. Intelligence is asking where it came from. Information is the headline. Intelligence is reading the article. Information is the statistic. Intelligence is checking the time frame, the source, and what the number actually measures. Information is somebody making a claim. Intelligence is asking what evidence supports it. That difference is everything. Because the internet gives you a false sense of awareness. You can spend 4 hours scrolling and feel like you were keeping up. But were you? Or were you just being updated by a machine whose goal is to keep you emotionally engaged? Did you learn anything useful? Did you understand the incentives? Did you find the original source? Did you separate facts from assumptions? Or did you just bounce from outrage to outrage until your brain was too tired to care? That is not being informed. That is being flooded. And flooding is a tactic. When people are overwhelmed, they stop evaluating. They start reacting. They grab the first explanation that feels simple. They grab the first person who sounds confident. They grab the team that tells them who to blame. Because complicated reality is exhausting. A clean story is comforting, even when it is wrong. Especially when it is wrong in a way that makes your side look good. That is why simple answers are so powerful. This is why everything is broken. These people are the problem. This one clip proves it. This one person is responsible. Maybe. But real systems are rarely that simple. Politics is not simple. Money is not simple. Technology is not simple. Culture is not simple. Human beings are not simple. And when someone gives you an explanation that is perfectly clean, perfectly emotional, and perfectly designed to make you hate the exact people they already hate, you should probably slow down. Not reject it automatically. Just slow down. Because the world is full of people selling certainty to audiences who are tired of complexity. And this is where your attention becomes valuable. Attention is not just time. Attention is where your mind goes. It is what you train yourself to notice. It is what you allow to shape your mood, your beliefs, your fear, and your expectations. If you feed your attention nothing but rage, you start seeing rage everywhere. If you feed it nothing but disaster, you start believing disaster is all there is. If you feed it nothing but team loyalty, you stop seeing people as individuals and start seeing jerseys. That is not awareness. That is conditioning. So build a better information diet. Not a perfect one, a better one. Read beyond the headline. Find sources you disagree with sometimes. Watch the full clip. Follow people who explain instead of only inflame. Take a break when the feed starts making you stupid. And yes, I said stupid, because it can. The internet can make smart people dumb when it keeps them angry enough, tired enough, and distracted enough. Nobody is immune. That is why discipline matters. You do not need to know everything. Nobody can. But you should know enough to recognize when you do not know enough. That is intelligence. That is humility. That is how you stop confusing noise for knowledge. Because in the fog of war, information is everywhere. But real understanding? That is something you have to build. Build your own intel system. So, what does this look like in real life? How do you stay sharp without turning into a paranoid lunatic who spends every night connecting red string on a wall? You build your own intel system. Not some giant, complicated process. Just a few habits that keep you from being completely dependent on whoever shouted loudest first. First, separate news from commentary. News is what happened, who said what document exists, what was recorded, what was confirmed. Commentary is what does it mean, who is responsible, what should happen next, what pattern does this fit into? Both can be useful, but they are not the same thing. The problem is when commentary gets dressed up like news. Someone gives you their interpretation first, then hands you a few facts that support it, and suddenly you think you understand the event. Maybe you do, maybe you do not, but learn to recognize the difference. Facts are the terrain. Commentary is somebody telling you how they think you should move across it. Second, look for the original source when it matters. Not every dumb post needs a full investigation. You do not need to fact-check a meme like it is a federal case. But if a story makes you genuinely angry, scared, or ready to share it with everybody you know, that is probably worth an extra 2 minutes. Find the full clip. Find the original article. Find the document. Find the actual statement. Find the date. You would be shocked how often the story changes once you move one layer closer to the source. Third, build a small group of sources you trust for different reasons. Not sources that always agree with you. That is not an intel system. That is a fan club. Find people who are good at reporting. Find people who are good at explaining complicated things. Find people who correct themselves. Find people who show their sources. Find people who can tell you, I was wrong. That last one matters more than people think. A person who never admits error is not always strong. Sometimes they are just protecting a brand. Fourth, write things down. Seriously, keep notes. When a big story breaks, write down what was claimed on day one. Then come back a few days later. What held up? What changed? What got exaggerated? What did everyone confidently say that turned out not to be true? That habit teaches you something the internet does not want you to learn. How often the first version is incomplete. How often the loudest version is the least useful. How often people are rewarded for certainty before the facts arrive. And fifth, protect your attention. You do not need to react to every battle. You do not need to carry every outrage into your day. You do not need to let strangers with a ring light and a thumbnail decide your emotional weather. Some stories matter. Some stories deserve your attention. Some stories demand action. But not every flashing red notification is a mission for you. Sometimes it is just bait. Sometimes it is just somebody trying to turn your anger into their engagement. You are allowed to close the app. You are allowed to wait. You are allowed to say, I do not have enough information yet. That is your intel system. Separate facts from commentary. Check the source. Choose better inputs. Track what changes. Protect your attention. Simple. Not perfect, but better. Because the fog of war is not going away. The tools are getting faster. The clips are getting shorter. The lies are getting cleaner. The incentives are getting stronger. So your judgment has to level up too. Do not let the feed do all your thinking for you. Build your own intel system. Read the map, check the source, and move when you know where you are going. Do not become the fog. There is one final part of this. Do not become the thing you are criticizing. Do not get so angry about manipulation that you start manipulating. Do not get so tired of bad information that you start spreading anything that helps your side. Do not get so obsessed with calling out the fog that you become another person making it thicker. That is the test. Because it is easy to recognize bad behavior when the other side does it. It is easy to see the edited clip when it hurts your team. It is easy to demand context when somebody you agree with gets attacked. It is easy to talk about standards when the target is someone you already dislike. The harder test is what you do when the story helps you. When the clip confirms what you already believed, when the headline gives you the villain you wanted, when the comments are cheering, when your side is winning. That is when discipline matters most. Can you stop yourself? Can you say, this may be true, but I do not know enough yet? Can you refuse to share the version that makes you feel good if you cannot support it? Can you correct something after you have already posted it? Can you admit you got caught up in the moment? Because that is how you know whether you are looking for truth or just looking for ammunition. And look, nobody is going to do this perfectly. I will not, you will not. We are human. We get emotional. We get tired. We see things that hit our nerves. We react before we think. That happens. The point is not perfection. The point is having a standard you return to, a compass, a rule that says, I do not want to be easy to manipulate. I do not want to manipulate other people. I do not want my anger used like a weapon by somebody who only wants clicks. I do not want to build an audience by pretending certainty I have not earned. That matters. Because every time you share something, you are helping build the environment we all live in. You are adding signal, or you are adding noise. You are helping people see, or you are making the fog thicker. You are encouraging thought, or you are rewarding reaction. That might sound dramatic, but it is true. The internet is not some separate fake world anymore. It affects jobs, it affects elections, it affects reputations, it affects families. It affects what people believe about each other. It affects whether people can even agree on what happened. That is real power, and real power needs real responsibility. The answer is not to become silent. The answer is not to become scared of every opinion. The answer is not to act like every issue has two equal sides and nobody can ever say anything clearly. No, speak, have principles, take positions, call out bad ideas, fight for what you believe is right. But do it with enough discipline that your voice means something. Do it in a way that makes people trust you more over time, not less. Do it in a way that does not depend on the next pylon. Do it in a way that survives after the trend dies. Because the fog of war does not only come from big institutions. It does not only come from politicians, media companies, platforms, or AI systems. It can come from us, from our shares, from our captions, from our comments, from our need to be first, from our need to be right, from our need to feel like we are on the winning team. So fight the fog, but do not become it. Read the map, check the intel, use your voice carefully, and remember, in a world where everyone is trying to control your reaction, self-control is a form of freedom. Well, congratulations. You made it through an entire episode without letting a 15-second clip, a red arrow, and somebody yelling, "Exposed!" recruit you into an information war. This was episode 4, The Fog of War. And I think this matters more than ever, because every day somebody is trying to tell you what to think before you have had time to think. Somebody is trying to tell you who the enemy is. Somebody is trying to hand you a clip, a caption, a headline, a villain, and a reason to be angry. And sometimes they are right. Sometimes the story is real. Sometimes the problem deserves attention. Sometimes people need to be held accountable. But you do not help the truth by becoming reckless. You do not win the information war by repeating the first thing that makes you emotional. You do not become stronger by letting every headline pull your trigger. The game is real. The patch notes are real. You need to build your base, but you also need to read the map. Because if you do not know where you are, who is feeding you intel, what is missing, and who benefits from your reaction, then somebody else is moving you around the battlefield, and you might not even realize it. That is the challenge. Do not let the internet train you to react faster than you think. Do not let team loyalty replace judgment. Do not let anger become your entire worldview. Do not let cynicism convince you that nothing is true. Do not let confidence fool you into thinking it is the same thing as evidence. And do not become another person making the fog thicker just because it gets attention. Be hard to manipulate. Be hard to bait. Be hard to rush. Be willing to say, "I do not know yet. I need more information." That clip may not be the whole story. The facts changed. I was wrong about that part. Those are not weak words. Those are the words of somebody who still controls their own mind. And that is what this show is supposed to be. Not an outrage factory. Not a place where we pretend every issue is simple. Not a place where I throw a grenade into the comments and walk away. A place to talk about the systems underneath the story. The incentives, the strategy, the map, the part people miss when everybody is screaming at each other. Because somebody has to slow the fog down long enough to ask, what actually happened? What do we know? What is missing? Who benefits? And what happens if we are wrong? That is how you stay sharp. That is how you protect your credibility. That is how you keep your voice useful. And that is how you avoid becoming somebody else's weapon. So the next time a story hits your feed and it makes your blood pressure spike, pause. Read the map. Check the intel. Look for the source. Ask what is missing. Then decide whether the fight is real. Because in the fog of war, the first person to move is not always the smartest. Sometimes the smartest person is the one who waits long enough to see where the ambush is. I'm Max Delta. This is the Max Delta Hour. The game is real. The patch notes are real. Build your base, read the map, and do not let the fog do your thinking for you. I'll see you in the next one.